All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Investing with the Difference. So today, as we talked in the earlier video, that we have the referendum contract up on the EOS mainnet. It's a big milestone, I think, in the EOS governance. So we have got Josh here from the referendum team. He's a part of the EOS Canada. And he's going to talk about, and we are going to take some important questions so that we understand better what it means. So let's get going. Welcome, Josh, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Raman.
So what do you feel like? It was a long journey to get this referendum contract up on the mainnet. So what do you feel like? This is something which was we have been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, it's been the contract itself has been ready for a few months. We've been really waiting to get it out. The biggest problem is going through A, enough testing, B, setting up the tally tools, and actually a new tally tool just came out. So now we have more and better cross verification, and just getting it onto the chain because of some recent changes to Node EOS. There was a few things that had to be changed in the creation of the MSIG to actually push it on chain, which unfortunately we had to go through the learning curve for everyone. But thankfully now we all understand it better, and won't happen to the next contract that's going chain.
No, that's great news. So I think the focus today we are going to talk about is so that people understand it better. What can we expect from it? How voters can participate? But first of all, would you like to highlight like how do you see the adoption right now in the wallets, in the various tools? Is it are you satisfied with the progress already? Do you think it's almost available to everybody who's already on EOS mainnet and using their own wallets?
Yeah, I think right now there's about 8 different portals, 8 or 9 that I know of right now that have already integrated to the new eosio.forum account. And the contract hasn't been on the chain for even 24 hours yet. So been some great adoption by the UI devs to push out access to everyone right away. I think we're only going to see better and easier access in the next weeks and months.
No, sure. No, I think I'm already excited because I myself started voting and creating proposals. So the tools are already up and running, in link to Scatter, link to the wallets, which everybody is used to. So it's very exciting. So now let's get into the details. So I see that quite a few proposals are coming up, and people are voting for it. So do you want to highlight like what it means? Are these binding proposals? Are these what needs to be there to make this like real changes happen? While we see that these are really useful things, which are like people are already voicing their opinions. But what does it mean?
So the biggest thing that people need to be aware of is for a referendum to be enacted on the chain, it has to be clear how it should be enacted. The example I like to give people is if 2 people from across the world read the same proposal that passes referendum voting, does the BP know exactly what they're supposed to do? Will they both say that this is exactly the way it should be enacted? So a lot of referendums are being proposed because it's day one, everyone's excited, and that's to be expected. I'm actually really, it's getting more use right away than I expected, which is nice to see. But once people settle down and realize the power of this tool, we have to make sure that it gets used in a proper way. So that means if you make a proposal that needs code change, the code change should already be done, tested. So this way we know exactly what has to be done. Otherwise, something's going to pass and no one's going to know how to implement it. Who has to implement it? What are the things that it could break if it gets implemented? That has to all be thought of and worked out.
No, I understand. So I think then in that case, what we should see, like right now, anybody like me or somebody like a token holder writing proposals. So that means it's more of a like acting like a poll rather than a referendum in your eyes. And so I think right now it's more about getting some kind of consensus, and then hopefully more mature referendums will be written. And that we can be enacted. So let me ask, like just to conclude this particular part of the discussion. So if let's say a really clear referendum is written, which passes the requirement, as soon as it is passed, does it become binding, or does it still need to go through 15 by 21 voting for block producers?
That's a great question. A lot of people have been asking me as well. It does have to be enacted by an MSIG proposal that 15 of 21 block producers need to sign. The reason being is to give a contract on chain the authority to update the chain on its own is a little dangerous in my opinion. And we need to see a lot more testing, a lot more work being done and seeing what kind of proposals come through before something like that could be enacted. So yes, it does still need to be signed by 15 of 21. And some people have been asking, oh, isn't that a way for for BPs to block a proposal? I always tell people for a referendum to pass that meets the constitutional thresholds, it needs about 85 million votes at the minimum, yes. that means there's 85 million tokens that could change the top 21 if they need to, if a BP is not signing.
No, that makes sense. So, and also I think it is 1:1 rather than like, you cannot vote multiple times on a referendum. So as compared to BP, you can vote 30 times. So this have exact value that vote counts. So if 85 million people are voting for a particular referendum, I'm sure that they will be able to change a particular BP out. So that's a great comment. So now let's talk about how the referendum will pass. Like, let's say the proposal is there and people vote on it. So we did hear about the 15% threshold. That means the total tokens, 15% of that have to be voted. At current moment, I think it's around 154 million tokens need to be voted.
Correct.
Then can you explain a little more on the conditions? Like I heard that it's going to be 10% more yes than no. So out of that 154 million, or it has to be 154 million yes?
No, out of the 154, that has to be, it's basically an easier way to think of it is 55% of all tokens that are voting for a referendum have to be yes.
All right.
So it's 55 to 45, that's the 10% difference.
All right. So that's how the 85 million came about, I assume. That 154 is the threshold, and then 85 needs to vote yes. And so now, well, let's say if at one point we reach that thresholds, and what is the next condition to make it binding?
So the next condition is that that threshold has to be met for at least 30 consecutive days. And those 30 consecutive days have to be within a 120-day period from the beginning date of the proposal.
All right. So that means if out of these 30 consecutive days, if any time the thresholds are dropped in between, then we have to start this 30-day count again.
Correct.
And let's say if we are like, if we reach the stage around 120 days, so is the 120 days maximum, or can we have the referendum go on for longer?
Well, that's the maximum, but you can always repropose a referendum. So it's just a matter of that single proposal has to be done within 120 days.
All right. So ideally, I think if you do not meet your threshold in 90 days, you better repropose because that's not going to pass. And similarly,
repropose and change it. Because if you didn't get it the first time, you probably won't get it the second time.
No, I understand. But let's say if you're almost reaching the stage where you see that you're up close to threshold, you may still want to repropose as it is because it takes time for taking it, marketing the idea, and so on. So I'm assuming that initially it may be challenging because people are going to be not used to that. Now, let me ask another way. So I see that the minimum thresholds are much lower. Like you can propose it for a week, for 10 days, for 30 days. Does it even make sense to do those, or those polls are useful in your eyes?
I think those are extremely useful. I think we're going to see a ton of polls and very, very few referendums. And I think that's the way it should be. Let's poll the community sentiment. Now we have a way of not just asking Twitter, not just asking Telegram what they want. We have a way of token holders actually telling us exactly what they want. It's on-chain, verifiable, auditable. So I think a lot of small 7 to 10 day polls is exactly what we need to whittle down what needs to be proposed in a proper referendum style.
All right. So it makes sense. So I think what we are seeing is, so there is no harm in creating 30-day polls and trying to get that. And then once we have the voice from the community, we can actually work with some serious people who know how to write a referendum, which can be implemented. So that's a great idea. I think that's something which I would want all the viewers to think about. Do not hesitate in creating polls. Go and promote it and do vote on these polls, even though they may not be directly binding or they cannot be implemented. So now let's talk about the voting itself. So we already clarified in my last video, we talked about how the proxy voting will work. So proxy can vote for referendums, and also it gives the right to the accounts without changing the BP proxy. They can override the proxy. So they can also vote while their proxy, they do not have to take the proxy away. So they can still vote. So can you add a little more color to that? Is it like well understood, and what are the other parameters they need to worry about if somebody's proxying?
Yeah, so like you said, the biggest things you want to make sure that everyone could have their own voice heard. So if you disagree with the way that your proxy voted on something, you can override that proxy, just as simple as casting a vote. One thing I will mention, that if I have a proxy that, let's say, votes yes on a proposal, and I want to vote no, and then I go and vote no, that's simple to do. But if I want to remove my vote for whatever reason, and I do an unvote action, then my vote goes back to the proxy. It doesn't go down to 0. It doesn't get erased. It goes back to the proxy. So that's one thing that some people should know as well.
So also, yes, that's an interesting point. So would you also like to explain why would somebody say no? What is the difference between no and not voting?
So there's yes, no, and there's abstaining. So I don't want to vote for something would be an abstention. Where that could be useful could be I don't have an opinion on a particular proposal, but I agree that it should be heard, and the people who do care about it should have their voice heard. So I'm basically proxying my vote. Instead of to a direct proxy, I'd be proxying my vote to the community as a whole. So if it needs to meet a threshold, let's say a proposal needs 1 million votes to be considered final in terms of a poll, and it only has 800,000 votes, and I want to add to that number, I can vote for it by casting an abstention, and then whatever the yes and no ratio will decide. Even though I don't care to affect it, I just think that it's an important thing to be heard.
So can we say there is a way to add to the 15% threshold without really voting yes or no?
Correct. Yes, there is. It's a little bit more difficult. There's a few people who have been working on it, because right now the way it works is there's when you vote, you're not actually voting a yes and voting a no in terms of how the chain sees it. You'd be voting a vote value. So a no by default is usually a 0, a yes is a 1, and there could be other options depending on the type of poll or type of referendum you create. So let's say the votes are 0 for no and 1 for yes. If I vote 7, it's registered on chain as being a vote, but it doesn't count towards yes or towards no. It's a little harder to do with the UIs so far. A few of them have talked about integrating an abstain button, but right now the two ways that are for sure you can do this are through the command line, so CLIOS and EOSC. And I'm sure I've spoken to some other UIs who will be integrating an abstention vote down. I think actually EOS Authority might have already done it. I have to go on a double check.
So, all right. So I think this is great. So I'm just assuming like this is a great tool for somebody like Block One to come and say, oh, I like this idea. I want community to vote, but we are not meeting the threshold, and they don't want to impact yes or no. Can they come and say, oh, I want to vote with no voice, no yes or no, and let community decide, but I want to bring the threshold above 15%. Is that a great use case for this feature?
Yeah, especially because a lot of UIs are going to be filtering so far by the amount of tokens voted for a referendum. And so someone, let's say like Block One, thought something was important and didn't want to sway the community one way or the next, they can do exactly that. Vote each 7 instead of 0 or 1 on something. Wow. And I think lift it right to the top.
No, this is great. I think this helps a lot. And in fact, this can be not just Block One. Any whale can do that, which doesn't have any specific opinion, and they want community to decide. So this is an amazing thing. In fact, I think it's a great idea for us to promote for exchanges to do that, because exchanges cannot really take easily this kind of voice. They have huge consolidated wallets, but they can always help decide. So now let's get to the exchange part. So is there any discussion or anything which exchanges have come to the system contract where they say, can we integrate this in their wallets like some of them have tried to do with voting? It's much easier now because it is 1:1. There is no 1:30. So I'm sure this will be much more powerful tool for exchanges to take and implement. So do you have any comments on that?
We've tried to reach out to a few exchanges. A few of them said they're going to wait and see how it's accepted by the community and how the people use it. But they are definitely watching and keeping an eye on it. So we're hoping to work with them. We've reached out to a couple already, and we're just waiting to hear what they need from us and what they'd like to do.
All right, no, that's a great news. So now let's talk about other aspects of it. So one more thing which everybody's asking is there's a lot of confusion around staking, DKs. Like when you're voting there for BPs, you have this kind of a weekly DK. You have impact based on whether the tokens are staked or unstaked. So can you clarify how this referendum voting works in terms of your stake tokens and in terms of DK of the vote?
Sure. So your vote weight in referendums is decided by your staked amount. So if you have liquid EOS, that is not going towards your vote weight, and there is no vote decay. We felt that a vote at the day 1 of a referendum should have the same vote weight as something that gets votes day 40 of a referendum, especially because it has to be held for 30 days. So we decided to go with just pure stake as the difference amount.
So that makes sense. So what you're saying is as long as the tokens are staked, they are going to count on a particular snapshot. And that, as we discussed, the threshold have to be met for the staked tokens to go above a certain number and in the yes or no direction. And so now, can you talk a little more about the snapshots itself? So how will this threshold be calculated? Will it be instantaneous? And how many times will it be taken?
So there's a few different APIs right now that are doing the calls to do the tally. The one that EOS Titan built, they're checking every single minute to check what are the total vote tallies for each referendum. The one built by EOS Nation runs about every 8 to 10 minutes, I believe. So basically, we know that every minute on one and every 10 minutes on the other, there's a snapshot being taken. So that's as frequent as it's being done. But realistically, it has to be down to the block if you want to follow the word of the Constitution. So at any point, if it goes below, but I don't think we're going to see major swings within that minute.
Sure. So is the system contract using one or other tool to decide whether it's passed or not, like for this tally of whether we are above the threshold for 30 days? What is system contract checking?
So the system contract doesn't run the tally. It would have been extremely, extremely expensive to run that tally and extremely intensive on the network to run that tally live on the chain itself. So it's actually being run by two separate off-chain systems. And then that information is being fed to all the different UIs. One day we hope to see live tally on chain, but that'd be a very expensive and complicated thing to create. And it didn't actually provide any added benefit of security or of tally confidence because everything is still on chain. We're just doing the actual counting and compiling of the data off chain.
Sure. So in the sense that you're saying is that the tally will be maintained by kind of a trusted third parties, but then you can always audit it based on on-chain data and make sure that nobody's trying to game the system by declaring that certain referendum passed.
Correct, yeah.
I think that makes sense. And I think there are going to be enough independent tallies, I am assuming, which are tracking this so that we can always find out if somebody, this is in a true decentralized way. Now that makes a lot of sense. So Josh, anything else you would like to highlight to the voters, to token holders, how you see this going? Like especially people are very excited about this ECAF discussion. We see that already the ECAF one is on the top. A lot of people are voting on it. Then the REX, I think, is one of the most awaited features that also needs a referendum. So what do you see, like, which referendums you think will need a lot more work, like from the code perspective, or which, like, do you have an example of referendum which can go very easily with just a suggestion which BPs can execute?
In my mind, the REX referendum is the first one that should really be pushed out to the community. The code was developed by Block One. It's all there. We can easily pinpoint exactly what needs to be looked at and what needs to be drawn attention by the community. So that's a prime candidate. The working proposal system, that also has a lot of work already put in. I've helped out with that as well. And you'll see the depth that the proposal goes into. We're hoping to set that as kind of the gold standard. So we worked a lot with the Ballot Crafter's Guide and to make a proposal that's easily understood by everyone. So things like that are extremely clear, extremely concise, and easy to understand. I think those are the ones that should be put forth first. Everyone gets comfortable with the system. We see how it all works, and now we know how to proceed going forward.
All right. No, that sounds great. And I think we are very excited, especially I think Rex, everybody's waiting for when. So let's say, okay, let's final question on this whole tally process. So let's say if this 30 continuous days happen very quickly, you do not have to wait for this 120-day period if the referendum is up for 120 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, you do not.
All right.
Yeah. And I should also say that let's say a proposal seems like it's not going to pass. Because you use RAM to vote for a proposal and you don't want to have your RAM consumed for the 120 days, you can always do an unvote action, which will return your RAM, or the proposer of the referendum or the poll or whatever kind of proposal he's made, he can actually expire the proposal prior to the 120 days, and then all the RAM will be returned to the users as well.
Sure. No, I think that's a great point you mentioned. So I would like to tell all the viewers that every vote you make, there is a small amount of RAM which is taken away from your account. So be careful as we see that we are definitely expecting thousands of referendums popping up. So be careful in voting on all the spam which will show up. And I'm sure the community will start marketing the important ones. And you will keep hearing about it as the system progresses. So I think it's an important point, but also do buy some RAM. It's very cheap. I think I just bought 1 EOS worth of RAM, and I could create multiple proposals, not just vote. Vote takes a very small amount of proposal RAM, but creating a proposal needs the whole proposal has to be stored in your account. So do consider buying a little bit of RAM. 1 EOS goes a long way, and do participate in this particular referendum. So Josh, any other final words for the community for what's this referendum brings and how you think we should think about it?
I think the biggest thing is get comfortable with voting, go vote on a few proposals, and then start talking to other people in the community, start talking to BPs, tell them exactly what you want to see, and let's make sure that everyone has their voice heard.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Josh, for coming here. It's a great milestone, and I hope that more and more people vote. We would definitely like to see some of these big ideas pass, and especially Rex, as we talked about, and some other ideas, which I think everybody is looking forward to. And all the best, and thanks a lot for all the work you guys did for getting this on the chain, and now having a way to actually hear whales, but because now the whales will vote, and we will really know what exactly they think. And that is very important because big token holders need to have a say on important issues.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate all the work you're doing to try and educate everyone on this.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.